Hello and welcome to Father's Refuge podcast. My name is James Moffitt and I'll be your host. Today I have a special guest speaker, John DeDakis.
How are you, James? Thanks very much for this
Good.
opportunity to talk.
Absolutely. So, this is a safe space for fathers who've experienced deep loss, a place to share stories of faith, healing, and hope. John is an author, journalist, and fellow traveler on the road through grief. We'll talk about how loss has shaped his life, his writing, and his outlook on what it means to keep moving forward. So let's get into it. John, do me a favor and introduce yourself to the listening audience, please.
Okay. I'm John DeDakis. I'm in Baltimore right now from Wisconsin originally. I was a journalist for 45 years, 25 of those at CNN, and the last 7 of those as one of Wolf Blitzer's editors on the Situation Room in D.C. I retired from CNN in 2013 to write full-time. I've been a traditionally published novelist since, for the last 20 years. I write it as a young woman. That's a whole nother interview.
I bet.
And let's see, 6 of my novels deal with grief as a subplot, which is sort of inadvertent. It's just you write what you know, and so I drew from personal experience. And my 4th novel takes my son's death from a a heroin overdose, and I use that as a subplot for that particular book, Bullet in the Chamber. So, and now for the last 20 years or so, I've been a writing coach, a manuscript editor, and a writing teacher. And one of the things I teach is writing as a way to heal from grief.
Yeah, as I told you when we started talking about having this conversation on the podcast, I like the aspect of writing as a way to heal. And because I like to write as well. I'm not a professional writer by any stretch of the imagination, but I find it to be very therapeutic. And my goal, and my hope and my dream, my vision for this podcast is to provide an avenue for dads, fathers to explore uh, their journey through grief and how it's affecting them as fathers and their families and all of that. And so I think this is a unique opportunity to share this possible avenue of expressing themselves. Writing can be very therapeutic, as you well know.
It really can.
Let's see here. So for those who may not know you, could you share a bit about your background in journalism and what inspired you to become a storyteller?
I was always interested in telling stories, and I think I started to fiddle around with nonfiction when I was still 9 years old. Decided to go into journalism sort of inadvertently. My dad was a lawyer, and my plan was to go into practice with him and then use the law as a stepping stone to get into politics. And if my career trajectory had turned out the way I had intended, I would have been the guy sworn in on the Capitol steps in 2008 instead of that guy from Kenya or wherever Trump says he's from. But for the good of the country, I decided to go in a different direction. Went into journalism, which is pretty much just the facts, and did that for a long time. And I covered the White House when Reagan was president and went to CNN in 1988 as a writer. But within a year, they made me an editor. But I discovered that editing was tedious. It paid well, but it was fault finding. And so I needed a creative outlet. And that's when I started to turn to fiction. And it took a little while to kind of get the hang of it because unlike what some presidents will tell you, it is a firing offense to make things up at a reputable news organization. And so giving myself permission to fictionalize things took a while, but once I learned how to do that, then that was very freeing. And it took me 10 years to get the agent that I've got. We're still together after 20 years. And she's the 39th agent that I queried. And the manuscript went through 14 major revisions. So I tell my writing students, if you take good notes, I'll save you 9 years in the process.
There you go. So 2008, that was the Obama era, wasn't it?
That's right.
Yeah, I thought you said Trump.
I said that I would have been sworn in on the Capitol steps, unlike that guy from Kenya or wherever Trump says he's from.
Oh, I got you. I
As you
got you.
may
Okay.
know, he made up, he was not particularly honest about where Obama was.
Well, I think I heard Hawaii as one of the
Hawaii
places.
is the actual place. Kenya is where Trump alleged that
Oh.
Obama was born in order to disqualify him for president.
I got you.
They call it the birther lie.
I got you. Okay. Well, I find it interesting that you're being a journalist and being able to have conversations with sitting presidents. I can only imagine how unique that was.
Well, yes, it was. I mean, I wouldn't say it was feet up on the desk conversations, but it was, news conferences, interviews, things like that.
Sure, you had an opportunity to ask them questions, right? So you've been open about the loss of your son, and I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
Can you take us back to that time? What helped you begin to navigate through that grief and start to heal?
Whoa. Well, let's see. I can tell you the story quickly. My son was 22 years old. He had a great sense of humor, great personality. He had taught himself how to play drums, how to play guitar. He was a food runner at a high-end restaurant in the DC area, was quite intrigued by what was going on in the kitchen, and so he convinced the chef to teach him how to be a cook. And so that's pretty much where he was when he went missing. And that was out of character for him to go off the grid. And he was missing for a week and was discovered dead in my car of an accidental heroin overdose. And the car was found just a block and a half from our house next to a light pole with a neighborhood watch sign on it. And so, that was awful. And I had to identify his body at the morgue, and there was a representative from a grief counseling center who gave me some literature and then just backed off and remained unobtrusive. And I brought the literature home and put it on the dining room table. My wife and I would take turns looking at it and thinking about it. And then my wife suggested that grief counseling might be a good way to go. That had not been my background, my experience. I'd never been through, any kind of grief counseling before, even though my sister had taken her life in 1980. So I had been around grief and loss already, but had never really dealt with it. And when my sister died, someone suggested that I should move toward the pain. I didn't really understand the concept, but as a journalist, you deal with people in pain. Often you see them on the very worst day of their life. So I wasn't a stranger to grief and loss, but it's much different when you are, the receiving end of a major loss like that. So my wife and I decided to go through grief counseling, but we went through it separately. They wanted us, and I think that was actually wise because there is just so much baggage that you have personally that you really need to unburden yourself one-on-one with a counselor. And Cindy went through her own counseling experience separately. And so that was then, and that was about a 2.5 year journey where it was a safe place. Think about 5 months into the relationship with my grief counselor, I remember saying something like, there's something I really need to tell you, and the only two people I've ever told this to are dead. And she flinched, and I said, that's not why they're dead. And she relaxed, and I was able to tell her, what was burdening me. I'm not going to tell you, thanks for asking, but, it was a relief to be able to share that and to get it out there. And I think that really enhanced and maybe even accelerated the healing experience because, we were really able to look at some, detailed granular things that I was needing to work through. So I found grief counseling to be incredibly helpful in the long run.
Well, that's good. Yeah, I don't think it's normal for people, especially men, to go towards the pain, right? And I think many of us, I think the human spirit, the road less traveled or the path of least resistance is what's normal for us because
Yeah.
I don't know a lot of people that thrive on conflict, right? Or thrive on painful situations.
Right.
And
I mean, I think our society tends to anesthetize the pain. And at least in my experience, the women I know understand that crying can be an emotional safety valve. Whereas, we're kind of conditioned to hold it in and be strong and not show our emotions or be vulnerable. And I think that's a trap. I think that, and I'd be interested in your opinion of this, I think that guys, because they tend to hold it inside, it doesn't make the pain go away. It just becomes corrosive. And if you think about it, just about with maybe one or two exceptions, every mass shooter is a guy. And my hunch is, and I've got no data to back it up, but my hunch is that you've got unresolved grief and anger going on to the point where the tears have become bullets. And
uh,
the alternative is just to talk it out and to work it through and to
right.
process it and move forward in your life, as opposed to letting it build and build and build in a corrosive and dysfunctional and dangerous way.
I think that, and I don't have any real data to back this up either, but I have followed, because of my law enforcement background and private security and all of that. I'm very involved in the Second Amendment community. I'm a gun owner. I belong to several gun organizations. In any way, so I'm very in tune with civil rights, Second Amendment, gun ownership. And I'm also very in tune with not necessarily gun violence. I don't like the terminology gun violence, because guns are not violent. And I know there are many people that argue until the cows come home that if there were no guns, then there'd be no mass shootings. And I'm like, okay, well, if there were no cars, then there wouldn't be any drunk drivers, right? So it's kind of that flip side of that argument. But I have heard, and to my listening audience, I've had a cold for 2 weeks, so if I'm clearing my throat, that's the reason why. I think that on many occasions, when they do the investigation on the shooter, of course, they always go to their school or their people they went to school with, church, mom, dad, relatives, family members, neighbors. And one of the things that you always hear, one of the reasons, like some of these people they're all over social media, right? So the police always scour social media and look up their Facebook accounts and Snapchat and all these different social media accounts, and they uncover seems like a history of being very disgruntled. You know, uh, there's some of them are racist, to a certain degree. They're either extremely conservative or extremely liberal. They're on the outer fringes of either side of the fence. You
Right.
know,
Maybe bullied,
and
in some
bullied,
cases,
yeah,
or abused.
depressed, dealing with depression,
Right.
alcoholism, drug addiction. There's a combination of factors, I think, that may be underlying stressors that cause them to eventually snap and do the horrible things that they do.
Exactly.
It's a multifaceted problem.
Would you, based on your experience, would you agree that it's possibly because these people didn't process their anger and grief in a constructive way?
Well, sure. I think that's one of those underlying conditions that maybe cause them to snap and to go off the deep end and do something drastic and as horrible as that. Like people that use their automobiles to, go through, these parades and these events in New
Exactly. Right.
Orleans and New
Yep.
York City. And we hear all these tragic events where people are using their trucks or their cars to mow down 20, 30, 40 people and kill them,
Right.
And yes, I think that our society has become somewhat of a pressure cooker society, in that there's a lot of stressors, there's a lot of
Yeah.
pressure on people.
Yeah.
People are, have a lot of angst, and people have a lot of pent up emotions, you know.
Yep. Yep.
And I don't remember in history, I don't remember of any female mass shooters. Do you? I think all of the mass shooters
Yeah, I
or
don't.
active shooters have been male.
Right. Right.
Some of them have been conservative Republicans, and some of them have been,
Yeah,
liberal
it's
or
not it's
Democrat.
not a it's not a political thing.
No,
It's an unresolved grief, anger situation, and I think to a certain extent without overgeneralizing, a gender specific kind of problem.
Right. And I think that, I think that parents or loved ones, wives, parents, grandparents, pastors, churches, whoever knows these people. And of course, a lot of, you hear all the time when they go to interview neighbors, a lot of times you hear them say, "Well, he is the kindest, gentlest,
Right.
wonderful person we've ever known. He was an altar boy. He was a member of his church. He sang in the choir." And these people are shocked, that person could actually commit a horrendous crime like that,
Right.
and
Because they
take
kept it
life.
all bottled up.
Yeah, yeah. They're leading double lives, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yes, and back to the focus of the podcast, I agree with you in that, if you were raised in this, let's say, 60s, 70s, and 80s, men were not encouraged to have emotional intelligence. Men were encouraged to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. I personally was told by my father that men don't cry.
Yeah.
You don't show emotions. You deal with it. You suck it up, buttercup. You internalize it, you compartmentalize it, you do whatever you need to do, but
You know
don't be a
what,
sissy
though?
about it.
I agree with you, but I'm concerned that the pendulum might be heading back in the direction of, the suck it up phase. Empathy is now considered a swear word almost. And so I think we got to be really careful about where we're heading right now, because it seems to me, I could be wrong, but my impression is that, being macho is now the in thing. And I think that's a trap. I think it's dangerous.
I think over the years, I think that men have been under attack, and women for that matter. But I think the what's the catch term,
Toxic
masculine,
masculinity,
yeah,
right?
toxic masculinity. In other words, men have been labeled as being toxic because they are, God forbid, they're men, right? And they're doing men
Sure.
things, manly things,
Right.
and whatever, And it's like you said, I'm no expert on any of this stuff, but I think some men have they're how do you say it? Not gender affirming, but gender attacks,
Well, gender
almost.
denying. I mean, it's.
Right.
I'd like to explore this a little bit. One of the I have a podcast myself, and one of my friends is a psychiatrist and a writer, and we did an interview about masculinity, and he talks about toxic narcissism, which is really not a gender related thing, because his view is similar to yours, that a gender in and of itself can't be toxic. And that's the problem. There are men who certainly behave in a toxic way, but all men aren't toxic, even though I would imagine that if you're a woman who's been on the receiving of a lot of toxic behavior, it's going to be hard for you to, see that there may be some guys who aren't like that. I'm pretty sure, though, that at least the women I know are able to differentiate between someone who's narcissistically toxic and someone who's kind and gentle and all right. But I think the point you're making is really an important one, because I think that for a long time men have felt under attack, and maybe have been, some of the good guys have been lumped in and have been, in a sense, victimized by proxy, but for some of the bad behavior of the bad boys. Um, Another phrase that's been thrown around is incel, an involuntary celibate, because the girls, won't give the nice guy a chance. They fall for the bad boy. And it's the nice guys who lose out, and that makes them angry as well. And if they're shy on top of that, then, it's hard for them to forge a meaningful relationship with a woman, because they're intimidated, and they and it makes it difficult for them to process. It's a grief situation. I mean, you don't have to lose a loved one to be going through grief. You can lose a pet, a relationship, all those kinds of things can create the same grief experiences,
Sure.
those 5 stages. And of course, then the 6th stage is finding meaning. And I think that's really the ultimate goal, is to, whatever is causing your grief, whatever is causing the pain, is worth examining so that you can become, a better person, a stronger person going forward in your life.
Right. Well, I'm hoping that this podcast will reach the ears of men that have not been encouraged to explore the raw emotions of grief, and that have pressed it down and repressed it and
Yeah.
internalized it, and not allowed. Look, they have not allowed themselves to have any kind of relief valve to
Yeah.
let some of that steam off.
Right.
Right. In grief, especially in the early days, I remember when Jessica passed away, it was very intense,
That was
very intense.
2001, right?
Yeah, that was 24 years ago, or 2024 years ago.
But it's still fresh in many ways, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I remember the hour and the day she passed away. I watched her take her last breath, and
How old
it's
was she?
10. She was 10
Oh, man.
On September the 11th of 2001, when the World Trade Center went down. She would have been 11. That was her birthday. So every September the 11th, we remember, those 3,000 people that lost their lives in the World Trade Center, and we lost our daughter. And so in the early stages, grief is very intense.
Yeah.
The triggers come fast, hard and fast. You can be watching a movie, listening to a song on the radio. You can be driving down the street and going by a park or a special place that they used to like to visit. There are many, many triggers that
Yeah.
are very prevalent and cause a lot of pain initially.
I have a story that I can tell about music. Right after my son died, my wife and I were in the car, and there was a CD on, and a song came on, and my wife hit the button to advance it to the next track. And I remember asking her, "Why did you do that?" And she said, "Every time I hear it, it makes me cry." As it turns out, it was when I heard that song, I hit repeat because it made me cry. Same song, same emotional reaction, different way of dealing with it. And that was probably the light bulb moment that helped our marriage survive, because I think I realized instinctively that I wasn't going to be able to fix her pain. We were going to have to deal with our pain separately, and that we were going to get our emotional support elsewhere, and that comparing our grief to each other was a non-starter. And I think that's one of the reasons half the marriages of parents who lose children, those marriages fail, because I think they're comparing their grief to each other. You should be doing it this way. Snap out of it. You should be farther along. And that's not helpful, because there's no one right way to grieve.
Yeah, that's true. There is not one. There's not a right way or a wrong way. Well, I think, when my wife and I went through that in 2001, like I said, there was as far as I could do. Now, we went to a support group at the hospital while she was still alive. So there was a support group for parents that had children that had cancer and were going through the treatment process. And as a couple, that was a good thing. But of course, after she passed away, we no longer went to that support group, because nobody in that support group that still had children that are alive and still struggling, there was a lot of hope.
Sure.
People had hope that their children would survive, right? And so
Yeah.
they didn't want parents in that support group.
Did you switch to a group of
No,
bereaved parents?
no, we didn't. We were not aware of any support groups for grieving parents. And
That's changed now, right?
oh yeah, it has. And I think that psychology, psychiatry, therapy, family therapists, I think over the years, it has become more acceptable. Not only has it become more acceptable for people to seek out professional therapy and counseling, but I think that the mental health, mental retardation, psychology, psychiatry, whatever the terminology is that we want to pick, I think the therapist realm or the therapy whatever, I think it has advanced a lot. It's just like medical science has advanced a lot over the years. I think the availability for people to have some sort of therapy has been more prevalent and more people. I think people have been exposed to that availability more. In 2001, we didn't know anything about it. My pastor at our church, he was a he dealt with uh, not a grief counselor, but um, he was a pastor. He was also a hospice. He was a chaplain, and he also dealt with end of life things. But anyway, he never counseled. He never told us about, hey, y'all ought to think about therapy, or family therapy. We had young kids still. I looking back, I wished I'd have got them into therapy, but we
So how
just
did you get through all this then?
that's a good question. just, just dealt with it, man. Just dealt with it. I'm not afraid to cry. I guess you could say I'm somewhat emotional. I'm the guy that sits there in the recliner and cries, about things I see on TV. And
Good
I
for
was
you. But that's hard. Is that hard for an IT person? That would seem to me that's not your comfort zone.
well, you're a lot of IT people. A lot of IT people are kind of nerdy. They're real good with technology. They're real good with hardware, software. They're not necessarily good with people, right? In other words, there's a lot of people out there. I've been doing IT for 30 years, and I'm a little bit different in that I have a lot of soft skills. I know how to communicate with people. I know how to listen to people. I know how to show empathy and sympathy, and I know how to put their mind at rest, when they come to me with a problem. And so without painting too many IT people with a broad brush, I would say that, I just I don't know, I guess you could say for a man I've been somewhat sensitive over the years, and I always look at my wife and tell her, when she catches me, we'll say if somebody's cutting onions in the kitchen again, and I'll
Right.
tell her, you keep that to yourself because I have a tough guy persona that I'm trying to uphold here. Don't want don't want anybody to hear that I'm crying about a stupid movie or a song that I'm listening to on the radio, or I don't sit around and blubber all day long, but I have my moments. And so over the years, I spent, if you've listened to any of the podcast episodes, I got one of them called "The Crazy Man at the End of the Street." It was like the fourth or the fifth episode here, and I talk about my arguments with God, walking down the street in a thunderstorm with a beer in one hand and shaking my fist at him with the other, and
Wow.
just telling him how I felt. I'm like, and pleading and bargaining with him to take me and not her. I'm the worm here in this picture. Take me.
Wow.
If anybody deserves to die, it's me.
That's very powerful. Yeah.
And so so anyway, yeah, grief is an ugly thing. It's not an end all. It doesn't have to destroy your entire life.
That's right.
It certainly affects your life. It certainly has a profound effect on your emotions, on your mind, your psyche,
It
your
changes you.
psychology, your full, everything, physiology, the whole nine yards. And emotions are a very powerful thing, and if you don't manage your emotions correctly with a little bit of temperance, with some maturity, then obviously, we got mental institutions full of people that can't manage their emotions,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
or whatever,
It,
and because of mental illness, what have you.
yeah.
And going back to active shooters and people that go off the deep end and decide to start killing people, there's a lot of mental illness there, you know.
Totally. Absolutely. And I think that's something that isn't really addressed nearly as much as it should. My most recent novel, Enemies Domestic, has definitely a focus on mental illness as one of the problems facing us in our society right now. It's a crisis, and I don't think we're really addressing it effectively.
So, how did your faith and your writing help you make sense of your pain and find purpose again after loss?
Well, that's a difficult question. I was raised Episcopalian, and there was a time where I was an evangelical, probably for a long time, because it brought a lot of stability in into my life. After Stephen died, I think I became sort of spiritually unmoored. I knew where the pier was, but I was less certain of things, and so I did a lot of thinking and assessing and talking about it with my grief counselor, and kind of made some decisions and came through on the other side with a lifestyle and a philosophy that works for me, that's very practical. It's not, I didn't jettison Christianity or my faith per se, but I think I'm less doctrinaire about it. I'm less able to articulate what I believe, and yet I know that there is some spiritual stability and strength and resources that are available to me, but I don't know if I could really articulate, what it all means or where it's coming from, because I think the more you articulate it, the more you're putting God in a box. We're talking some pretty cosmic stuff. And as soon as we start to, articulate it, it becomes smaller and smaller as opposed to bigger and more.
One of the things that on this podcast, maybe not so much, more on my ABCs of Parenting Adult Children podcast, I I like to remind people that there are a lot of churches, especially in the South. There's a church on every corner, it seems like, right? But I don't care if you're Protestant, Catholic, Buddhist, Hindu, whatever your flavor of religion is, right? Whatever doctrine, religious doctrine or theology that you subscribe to. I think that a lot of churches have pastoral counseling. They have programs that are there to help people. Life is difficult. It's hard. Divorce, raising kids, teenagers, losing children to cancer, all sorts of humanity is plagued with a plethora of issues, right? There's many, many things that affect us. And churches, a lot of churches have over the centuries, I think, have keyed in on the fact that, we go to church because we're sick. We're spiritually sick, right? We need Jesus. We need grace. We need mercy. We need many things that religion ascribes to, right? And whether your God's name is Jesus or Muhammad or whoever, I think that humans or humanity has always kind of looked at the stars, right? And we've always wondered if there was something bigger than us, right?
Right.
And
Yep.
that there was purpose for our lives, a bigger purpose, a better purpose, right? Other than what we've been scratching out on our own, right, through the centuries.
There's something I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it quickly, but there's a scene that speaks to this. Keep talking, and I'm going to see if I can find this, because I
Okay.
address this specifically in one of my novels, where my protagonist is attending the church service, the funeral service for the First Lady who has died. So keep talking about that, and
All
I
right.
think I can find this.
Well, I said all that to say that I encourage families, men, fathers, wives, mothers to certainly investigate, their local church as a possible avenue for healing, to spiritual healing, emotional healing. See if they've got pastoral care, talk to them. A lot of them will do it for free. Sometimes they'll, provide professional counseling, and if you don't make a lot of money or whatever and you can't afford a professional counselor, they will have a sliding scale to where they'll, give you a break on the cost or whatever. But churches are they're one of the avenues to find help. Call 211. That's United Way. All these big corporations and companies they send money to United Way every year as donations, charitable donations, so that those help organizations in your community can provide assistance. And so yeah, there are programs out there. There are things that you can investigate that can provide you with some assistance.
Here, I found the passage.
Okay.
This the setting. My protagonist is White House press. She's a White House correspondent for the Associated Press. She was interviewing the First Lady, and the First Lady dies during the interview. And so now Lark, my protagonist, is part of the travel pool of a limited group of correspondents because the press corps is so big, they whittle it down to just a few correspondents that travel with the president. And so she's in National Cathedral as the organ music is playing, and so as the people are assembling to get ready for the church service, she is ruminating about her own faith experience. And so this is just a short excerpt from my
Okay.
novel Fake. So the organist played something soothing and pastoral. I glanced at my bulletin to notice the organist's name, and God and I aren't always on speaking terms. It's a love-hate thing. I've talked about this a lot with my grief counselor, and I began to seriously question my faith of my youth when I was sexually assaulted in college and found myself lurching toward atheism. And yet I didn't lose my faith completely. Yes, there's plenty of evidence that God doesn't exist. So many assholes live long and easy lives, while good people like Rose die young. Somebody who attacked me the day before was at least an example of God's aloofness. So far, there'd been no blowback from the time when I slapped this person, nor had I heard anything at all from my boss, I'd sent an email alerting him to the person who attacked me. But I wondered, as I was sitting here in the church listening to the organ, it gave me some time to relax and ruminate. I wondered yet again about God. As I've thought about the vastness of the cosmos and the complexity of even the tiniest forms of life, I've recognized an amazing symmetry that suggests to me the existence of an intelligent designer behind the universe's intricate design. But that's not proof God exists, it's only evidence. The rest is faith. My faith amounts to one mustard seed, maybe two, but not three. That's because of the events of the past few years, not to mention the past 24 hours. To be honest, my faith is tested the most by the sanctimonious, intolerant certainties of the doctrinaire extremists who use God as a cudgel. Yes, I'm talking to you, Osama bin Laden, but I'm also talking to you, Westboro Baptist Church, and your God hates fags gay bashing. When being brutally honest with my grief counselor and myself, I realized that the most of the times that I pray, I'm in some kind of a jam. But lately, I'm seeing a certain gratitude emerging. I can now argue with a smidge of confidence that God not only exists, but has probably gotten me out of a lot of tight situations. Or, as my boss and mentor often tells me, you're smart and courageous. Or as I often reply, I'm very lucky. All those thoughts and biases were a swirl in me as I settled in for the funeral service of Rose Gannon, the First Lady of the United States of America.
Well,
So even reporters wrestle with their faith.
well, I think we all wrestle with our faith if we're honest with one another. You know, I've been a Christian since I was 17 years of age, and I can see many times where God had his hand in my life, on my life, and it wasn't for his grace and mercy, I'd probably be dead or in prison or worse, or in a hospital bed. And I have to say that our experience with losing our daughter to cancer really shook our faith. It really rattled the foundation of our faith. And I didn't lose my faith. as my pastor once told me. I didn't walk away from my faith. Am I maybe a little bit more of a doubting Thomas than I used to be? Yeah, absolutely. You know, do I feel, and the older I get, and the more that I, I've probably read the Bible cover to cover multiple times over the years. I was involved in street ministry for 10 years. I was very, very involved in ministry in one shape, form, or fashion. And I feel like, well, every time I read the Bible, I think the Holy Spirit illuminates certain truths to me at certain times, right?
Right. Yep.
And I feel like the more I read the Bible and those stories, it reminds me of what I just don't know. There's so much there that I don't understand and I don't know, and I probably never will know until I get to the other side, right?
Right. That's right.
And I got lots of questions still, and
I mean, and
I
probably the
still
biggest question is why, right?
right, exactly. But anyhow, so looking back, what has grief taught you about being a father, about love, and about what truly matters?
Oh man, that's a great question. There's a difference between sympathy and empathy. Sympathy is sort of intellectually understanding, oh, that must be really painful. Empathy is that you understand on an emotional level what someone is going through. And so, even though empathy right now politically is a dirty word, I think it is a tremendously healing word because it builds bridges and it allows us to better understand another person on a deep level. And in fact, I think one of the things that I think it's taught me is that, look, I'm a journalist at heart. And so, facts matter to me. But we are now in a situation where the political atmosphere is so toxic that we can't even agree on what the facts are. And I'm a very strong believer in trying to find common ground. But I don't believe we can find common ground politically, but we can find common ground on a human basis. And that means, you and I may disagree on a lot of political things, but we can certainly agree and relate on a human level, on an emotional level, on the losses that we've experienced. Because, as we've mentioned earlier, those transcend any kind of political positions. Pain is pain, loss is loss, and we need each other to be able to navigate this path that we're on now. And so I think that one of the things that it's taught me is that, grief and loss, that's the great leveler. That is what can unite us really in a way that a lot of other things can't and don't.
For fathers who are listening and may be in the early stages of grief, what words of encouragement or hope would you want to leave with them today?
If you face the pain and mind it and are patient with yourself, there's hope. You are different now. You're changed. And the goal is to find out how you're different, talk it out with someone who's a professional, who isn't emotionally invested in you so that you can say whatever is on your mind that may be antisocial or whatever, so that you can say it and get it out there. I encourage you to keep a journal if you're a writer or are so inclined. Poetry, writing song lyrics, writing a journal, writing a story, a short story, a novel, whatever it is. I would encourage you to look for ways to process these emotions. And there's no time limit on this. People have asked me, does time heal? I think time makes it easier, but I think a lot depends on what you're going to do with it and how you're going to process it. Final thought, I mean, there are a lot of different things that I could say, but I really think that it's important to take breaths, to breathe, to be in the moment. We spend all our time regretting the past and fearing the future, and we become ineffective in the moment. And I think cultivating the moment is something that is worth pursuing. And I think a practical way of doing that is to learn how to breathe mindfully, to take deep breaths, be aware of the moment, be aware of yourself, your emotions, and take your time. Don't rush this. Try not to anesthetize the pain. It's okay to feel it and to get it out. And I think that if you cultivate those kinds of things, in the long run, and take the long view, in the long run, you'll find that it will change. Things will change. Right now, it's a blur, and it seems like you're the only one experiencing these emotions. It's like no one else understands. A lot of people understand. And here's the other thing. 5 years from now, you'll be the one to be able to comfort someone because you've been through what they're going through now. And so keep track of how this feels. There was a person who took one of my memoir writing classes, and he kept a journal, and he was writing a memoir about his wife's death. And he told me that he went back and looked at his journals, and he said, I forgot how angry I was at the time because he had written it down, and that helped process it and get it onto the page. So it was no longer a burden to him in real life, but he was able to go back to those journals and extract it and be reminded that that too was part of the process. Anger was part of the process. So yeah, I mean, we've talked about a lot of things, getting together with other people who have experienced this. There's reason to be hopeful. There really is. In spite of, you may not believe me when I say that, but, James and I have both been through the mill, and we got through it, and we are different because of it, but we are also changed because of it. But both of us have found a way to work our lives forward by appropriating that pain and processing it and using it, and not only becoming stronger because of it, but being able to encourage others at the same time.
You never get over grief. Grief will always be there. It just takes on it as time goes on, you'll experience some healing, and it becomes less painful. But I think the sooner you deal with it, the sooner that you face the pain and deal with the emotional issues that are going on, the faster you'll heal,
Yeah,
you know.
I think
Don't let
so.
it fester.
Yeah,
So, anyway.
good
So
thoughts.
John, thanks for joining me today, and to the listening audience, I want to say thank you for the privilege of your time. Thanks for joining me for this conversation with John. His story is a reminder that even in the deepest loss, there's room for growth, purpose, and connection. If today's episode spoke to your heart, please share it with another father who might need to hear it. You're not alone on this journey. There's refuge here, one story at a time. I'm James Moffitt, and this has been Father's Refuge. Until next time, take care of yourself and hold on to hope.
Thanks, James.
Thank you, John.